What if the most important political value was just to be left alone? Today, we're diving into libertarianism. It's a whole philosophy built on that one single idea, freedom. And it's an idea that has fueled revolutions and still sparks some of the most intense debates we have today. By the way, if you've ever wondered where your own ideas fit in the grand scheme of things, you might want to check out a site called 8Values.cc. It's a great tool for mapping out your own political compass. See, this whole topic forces us to ask a really tough question, one that's at the heart of pretty much every political disagreement. How much freedom is too much? Where exactly do we draw the line between our individual liberty and the government's role in our lives? To figure that out, we first need to get a handle on what libertarians actually believe. So let's start right at the beginning. What's the single foundational idea that drives this entire philosophy? Okay, at its absolute core, libertarianism is about one thing: maximizing your individual liberty. The central belief is pretty simple. You should be free to live your life and use your property however you see fit, with just one huge rule: you can't harm others. It's a philosophy that's all about personal responsibility and, maybe most importantly, a deep, deep skepticism of government power. And this idea is not new, not at all. It actually traces all the way back to the Enlightenment, to a philosopher named John Locke. His argument was, for its time, revolutionary. Our rights to life, liberty, and property, they aren't gifts from a government. Nope, we're born with them. In this view, a government's only real job is to act like a security guard for the rights we already have. So how does that work in the real world? Well, for a lot of libertarians, the key is something called the non-aggression principle, or just NAP for short. It's a simple but pretty radical rule. You can't start a fight, period. Initiating force against someone is always, always wrong. The only time force is okay is for self-defense. Now, just think about what that really means for a second. From this perspective, any law that forces you to do something against your will, whether it's paying taxes for a service you don't agree with or a law that regulates a personal choice, is seen as an act of aggression. But this brings up a really crucial point about how we even define the word freedom. Libertarians are all about what's called negative liberty, which is basically freedom from outside interference. In other words, just being left alone. This is completely different from positive liberty, which is the freedom to achieve your potential. See, positive liberty often requires the government to step in and provide things like education or healthcare. Libertarians reject this, arguing that true freedom is the absence of coercion, not the presence of government help. So, the main idea seems straightforward enough, right? Maximize freedom, minimize coercion. But here is where it gets super complicated. That single word, libertarian, actually represents two vastly different and often totally conflicting worlds. Yeah, the history of the word itself is basically a battleground. Depending on where you are in the world, calling someone a libertarian can mean two almost opposite things. And you guessed it, the biggest fight is all about money. So get this, the term was actually born in 19th century France, and it was used by anarchists who were both anti-state and anti-capitalist. This is the root of left libertarianism, which sees giant private fortunes and corporate power as a huge threat to individual freedom. Now, fast forward to the 20th century US, and you get right libertarianism, which argues the complete opposite, that strong private property rights and totally free markets are the only way to guarantee our liberty. And this is exactly why libertarians often feel politically homeless on that old-school left-right spectrum. A tool called the Nolan chart really helps clear this up. It shows how libertarians stake out this unique position way up in the top corner. They want the personal freedom that you might associate with a social liberal, but they combine it with the economic freedom of a fiscal conservative. It's a real mix. But even if we just focus on that more common right libertarian side of things, there's another huge split. It's a debate that boils down to one simple question. What, if anything, is the government actually for? I mean, should it be tiny, or should it not exist at all? On one side, you have the monarchists, a view made famous by the philosopher Robert Nozick. They argue for a minimal state, basically a government that acts like a night watchman. Its only legitimate job is to protect you from force and fraud. So that means you get police, courts, and a military. But that's it, nothing else. No public schools, no welfare, no big infrastructure projects. Just the bare bones essentials. And then you have the other, much more radical side, the anarcho-capitalists. For thinkers like Murray Rothbard, even that tiny night watchman state is basically a gang of thieves, because it funds itself through taxation, which they see as forced. Their solution? Simple. Get rid of the state entirely. Let the free market handle everything, and I mean everything, even the police and courts, through private companies that you would choose to pay. So you have to wonder, where did such a radical idea, a world with practically zero government, even come from? To understand that, we've got to take a quick trip through history. The story really gets going in the 17th century with John Locke and his whole idea of natural rights, which was a huge inspiration for the American Revolution. But here's the twist. The word libertarian itself had a surprise beginning in 19th century France with socialists. It was only in the mid-20th century that thinkers like Hayek and Friedman in the US kind of reclaimed the term for free market capitalism. And that's the view that the philosopher Robert Nozick would make famous in 1974. Now, a philosophy this radical is bound to get some pushback. So what are the biggest challenges to the libertarian worldview? Let's take an honest look at the arguments coming from both the left and the right. So the critique from the left is mainly economic. They argue that without any regulation, you get massive inequality, huge monopolies, and that poverty itself is a kind of prison, limiting a person's real freedom. Meanwhile, the critique from conservatives is more social. They worry that all this extreme individualism would just erode the traditional family, community, and religious values that they believe hold society together. And then you have the really tough practical questions, like what happens to the elderly or people who are seriously ill if there's no social safety net? Who protects the environment from pollution if you have no regulations? And what if the whole core assumption is just wrong? There's this famous finding called the Easterlin paradox, and it suggests that once our basic needs are met, having more money doesn't actually make us any happier. And that leads to this fascinating modern challenge called the paradox of libertarianism. The economist Tyler Cowen points out that when free market policies work, they create a ton of wealth. But what do wealthy societies tend to want? Better schools, cleaner parks, more public services. In other words, they want more government. So in a strange twist, the very success of libertarian ideas could be the seed of their own destruction. So all of this brings us back to this single biggest question, doesn't it? Is maximum individual liberty the ultimate goal of a good society? Or is it just one important value that has to be balanced against other things, like community, security, and equality? How we answer that question really is what shapes the world we all live in.